On Maryland's injured workers and their families.
State Circle is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you.
For whatever reason this year, the governor chose to brief certain people and then tell the public was in the budget, and then invite the presiding officers the day after he tells the public.
The budget's introduced the same time every year. The governor has the breakfast the same time every year.
The new budget quickly becomes a political football.
I think this year is the year to do it.
I think this is not wise. It's not going to work.
Would a higher minimum wage help or hurt?
It has been found that in 70 to 90% of cases, if a man asks for custody, they get it.
And legal protection for victims of rape.
Connecting Marylanders to their government. This is State Circle.
Good evening. The big story around State Circle this week is a bumpy debut for the state's new budget. The annual spending debate started with a breakfast boycott, as Charles Robinson reports.
For whatever reason this year, the governor chose to brief certain people and then tell the public was in the budget, and then invite the presiding officers the day after he tells the public what's in the budget. So since we learned from the public was in the budget, we didn't feel we need to go to breakfast with the governor to hear what his version of the budget was.
The budget's introduced the same time every year. The governor has the breakfast the same time every year.
No,
just because he
has
had
a prior to announcing the budget. He has the breakfast, and he has Democrats as well as Republicans. He does not have 5 white men at the breakfast when he explains the budget. He has a diverse group. This is the Senate of Maryland.
Well, I got the email here of everybody that was invited.
No, not true. Not true. You two and three white Democrats and you two were invited to the breakfast a day after it was announced. That's not democracy.
The frustration seemed to spill from the timing and rollout of the 2019 budget from Governor Hogan. The governor came armed with charts and talking points before he showed his cards to the legislative leaders. He played up his accomplishments from holding the line on spending, overseeing and improving business climate, and creating a structurally balanced budget. Here are some of the highlights from the governor. Record spending for K-12 education, investing in school construction, holding state college tuition at 2%, and a 2% raise for state employees.
What's frustrating us is this mandated spending does not allow us to control spending the way we would like to, and that's why we're back again. It's like Groundhog Day. Where they keep spending more than we're taking in, and we keep closing the budget gap, and it keeps starting to, spread out again. And, we can do it, but we can't do it when both hands are tied behind our back.
The rollout was supposed to come during a breakfast meeting with leaders of both parties at the governor's mansion, but only the Republicans showed up.
It's hard to understand why we can't put those aside and let business be like business is supposed to be conducted, but things get in the way sometimes. It's unfortunate. So hopefully things will improve as time goes by.
Definitely it affected the well of, bipartisanship, working together, putting politics aside, all that rhetoric.
If there's one area of agreement between all of the parties, it's over the changes in the federal tax law. The legislature says it's going to put in 3 bills that will deal with everything from personal exemptions, estate taxes, and charitable contributions. And the governor says he's okay with that. In Annapolis, I'm Charles Robinson for State Circle.
Maryland's minimum wage workers are getting a pay raise this summer. The minimum wage will increase to $10.10 an hour, up from its current $8.75. Some lawmakers say it is time to go further, as Nancy Yamada reports.
Henry Ford said, if I don't pay my workers a wage that would allow them to buy the cars I'm building, I will never be a success.
Senator Richard Madaleno says he's convinced that gradually raising the minimum wage to $15 by 2023 is good for business and good for Maryland workers.
This is a measure to try to make sure that there is some degree of economic fairness and justice by raising wages at the bottom, which then helps put pressure on raising wages across the board.
He's introducing the legislation in the Senate. On the House side,
I think this year is the year to do it.
Delegate Shelley Heddleman will be trying to convince colleagues to raise the minimum wage by another $4.90 in the next 5 years.
It's time now to really focus on workers and those at the lowest end of the spectrum.
California and New York State have passed similar legislation. So has the District of Columbia and, more recently, Montgomery County in Maryland. But in the last 2 sessions, the move to raise the minimum wage to $15 has failed to get out of committee.
I think across the board you have seen continued economic growth in D.C., in Montgomery County. You know, those are some of the most vibrant economies in the country.
I had a conversation with a small business owner just the other day who was telling me he has always paid his workers above the minimum wage because he thinks it's good business practice.
On the flip side, some lawmakers say raising the minimum wage again is only putting the squeeze on business owners, especially small business owners who have long complained that more regulations and mandates are only hurting them year after year.
I already hear from them about the sick leave bill. They're talking about cutting back on the number of employees.
Echoing those sentiments,
I think this is not wise. It's not going to work.
Is Senator Andrew Serafini. He says competition in the free market will cause wages to rise naturally, but mandating another increase?
Frankly, the big boys don't care about this because they'll pay it, but that private mom and pop shop that's already struggling against the bigger companies and firms, this is who we're going to crush.
To that end, supporters point out
it's a transition period, so we're not springing it on them.
It sounds good, but when you really dig into it and understand what you're doing to businesses, you're just adding to the cost.
I'm Nancy Yamada for State Circle.
It's a bill that's been batted around Annapolis for nearly a decade. Yolanda Vasquez looks at why state lawmakers may act this year to remove the parental rights of rapists.
My newborn son was just 10 days old. My husband attacked me while I was holding my son.
Sophia Marjanovic is part of a coalition of women who have lost custody of their children to rapists, pedophiles, and domestic abusers.
It has been found that in 70 to 90% of cases, if a man asks for custody, they get it.
Which is why she testified before a House Judiciary Committee this week in opposition of House Bill 1, also known as the Rape Survivor Family Protection Act.
I just believe that it's essential that the state do whatever we can do to support a woman who's been victimized by rape.
Delegate Nick Kipke is a co-sponsor of the bill that would allow courts, under certain circumstances, to terminate the parental rights of a rapist.
We're told that this affects a small number of people every year in Maryland, but current law forces that woman to have to interact with the abuser.
Women who have been raped and are resultingly pregnant, which is about 5% of pregnancies, are in a really tough position.
Lawrence Ruth of the Women's Law Center says it's hard to understand all the technicalities of the bill. She's been testifying in favor of it since 2008.
I think this year might be the year in the Me Too movement, and it's time that we finally understand that women don't make these stories up, and they're not doing this for fun.
Opponents of the bill say there are many layers to this legislation, one of which includes judicial discretion, and they say that loophole does not fully take away the parental rights of rapists.
So when the bill says that the judge may terminate, that's a problem, because it gives the judge judicial discretion.
Marjanovic also wants to amend the 7-year statute of limitations clause, saying there should be no time limit on any sex crime. This is the 10th year the bill has been put forward. It has strong backing from top legislators.
I'm very optimistic that this year is the year. It's a very bipartisan issue. The governor, all the Republican leaders, all the Democratic leaders are together on this, and I think this is the year that we'll finally get this bill enacted.
A legislative victory that won't help this tearful mother regain custody of her 5-year-old son.
Every time I've stepped foot into court, it gets more and more dangerous for my son.
So you pull yourself out of it for his safety?
Yes, because I'm afraid for him. Because what I've seen, there is the justice system is broken in this case, and it needs serious reform.
In Annapolis, I'm Yolanda Vasquez for State Circle.
Joining us for this week's Annapolis Face-Off are Senator Andrew Serafini, Republican from Washington County, and Senator Bill Ferguson, a Democrat from Baltimore City. Thanks to both of you for being with us.
Glad to be here. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Both on the Senate Budget and Tax Committee, so we thought we would talk about the governor's budget proposal. Senator Ferguson, first, your initial reaction to that document.
Sure. I mean, I would say it's it's a pretty non-controversial budget overall, except for the fact it's very flat funded across the board. So there aren't we're not seeing huge investments in competitive advantage areas. We're sort of just seeing the same budget, flat funded. In one case that's okay, in the other our economy is growing, and you would think that the service provision that we have across the state would also be growing. I do have some real concerns about some of the cuts made directly to Baltimore City, which is not necessarily the full state budget issue, but these programs that were passed after Freddie Gray, the Baltimore package back in 2016. Were again zeroed out and made non-mandatory. So the legislature's got some work to do to kind of fix that. And we really were hoping to see some stuff around the cold schools in Baltimore City. Didn't see anything there, and so that's another area where we're going to be doing a lot of work.
Senator Serafini.
Certainly. We have to keep in mind that this is just the first pass. It's going to be a lot of work to this budget. The governor was handed a $750 million budget at the end of last year that he had to work on. And with his team from the budget department and his agencies, he was able to get that down pretty far. We have a balanced budget. The governor, his budget, we can only approve or cut. We can't add to. And the argument has been some of the things are good, but they've been done in mandates. It's a way that the legislature kind of forces the governor's hand. And so I think Senator Ferguson right. There's some things that the governor would have liked to have funded differently. But when 80% of the budget is already set by formula, and then these mandates push us over the revenue growth, then he's had to cut, and it makes it difficult. So a lot of people are happy with level funding, although Senator Ferguson and I agree there's still some things that we're going to need to work on. And this is just the beginning. There's going to be a lot of different things happen over this next 80 days or so.
We've heard all kinds of things about the impact of the new federal tax system. From your standpoint, how does it look for Maryland, good or bad?
Well, that's it. Well, from my perspective, I think it's an open question. It depends on what we do. And I would say the budget introduction is really only the introduction to the story, I think, for this year's session. The impacts of the federal tax reform on Maryland will really be where the real story is. You look just at the Children's Health Insurance Program. Should the federal government continue to move forward without funding that program for about 150,000 young people in Maryland, that would be a cost of roughly $125 million on the state of Maryland. If there's a surplus of tax revenues, then there's the opportunity to give it back to Maryland taxpayers or fund things like the Children's Health Insurance Program. And so I think that's where a lot of the big debates are going to be: is if Maryland experiences a windfall, how do we deal with that as a legislature?
Jeff, you say, is it good or bad? And I would say yes. Meaning that most Marylanders are going to see a reduction in their federal taxes, but almost all Marylanders will see an increase in their Maryland taxes unless we act. And Senator Ferguson, I believe, and our committee under Budget and Tax and Senator Casemeyer are really going to work to that. And actually, the solutions are simple, but it won't be easy, because the temptation to use some of these extra monies, if it's $500 or $750 million or so, and we'll know on the 25th of this month, that's going to be the argument. I think the fixes are quite simple. I think the governor wants to give it back. This is nothing that short of, because more of your income is taxable. If we don't take the actions that the federal did to increase deductions or lower rates, it's going to be a tax on Marylanders. I don't support that. I don't think the governor does. And then the issue is going to be, we think we should give it all back, but will there be some need? And certainly if CHIP is not funded, that's a different conversation. But we think short of that, we want to give it back to the constituency and the taxpayers in the state of Maryland.
You said simple fixes. What would those be?
Well, it's pretty simple. Maryland has a regulation that says if you take the standard deduction at the federal, you have to take the standard deduction at the state. If we, what we call decouple, that would allow somebody that's advantageous to itemize at the state to do it. We lost the personal exemption at the federal level. We could reinstitute that. We could do a different type of standard deduction. And finally, I think the one that is compelling is we're known as a high tax state. Our rates are high because of what happens at the state and the local. Why not use this as a chance to lower our tax rates rates so that we can become more competitive and yet do it in a revenue neutral stance. I think that would be wise and something we should consider.
I suspect that we're going to have an all-of-the-above approach. I do find it pretty remarkable that we are talking in Maryland about a federal government policy that is with a Republican president, and Republican in both chambers of the Congress are raising taxes for thousands of Marylanders to the tune of almost $1 billion. So I think we in the General Assembly look forward to having the conversation of how can we ensure that we protect Maryland taxpayers alongside balancing the interests of the important programs that we know lots of vulnerable Marylanders rely on.
Yeah, Jeff, I think the key is the White House said they wanted to simplify the tax code, they wanted to lower it for the middle class, and then they wanted to help corporate America. And so by them treating everybody the same and getting rid of special deductions that help some and not others, that does highlight the way that we have a progressive tax rate. So in effect, that wasn't their goal, but the reality is now it's up to us to figure out how we should equitably give back this money to the members. Certainly wasn't the goal. Simplification, postcard, 1040EZ is how you file your taxes would be great for so many people, but now it's our job to fix that at the state level for the issues we've created over time.
Senator Serafini, Senator Ferguson, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Our newsmaker this week is Prince George's County Executive Rushern Baker, who is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for governor. Thank you for being with us.
Jeff, it's great to be here. I love coming here.
Let's start with a political question. The most recent poll, at least public poll, was I think last week, and showed a nice lead for you in this Democratic primary. Outside of the Washington metro area, however, you're not that well known. Yes. So who is Rushern Baker?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and this is a good chance for the Baltimore region to get to know me. Not only county executive of Prince George's County, where I've been there for the last 7 years, but I served 8 years in the House of Delegates. That's where we met. 4 of those on appropriations, where one of my mentors was Pete Rollins, Howard Pete Rollins, who was the chair of appropriations and a delegate from Baltimore City. And so I got a chance to understand a lot of the issues in the Baltimore region because they're similar to what we have in the Washington region, whether it's education, healthcare, transportation, they're all critical. So I'm happy to get around the state and get people to know me.
Looks like 2018 sets up as a big Democratic year, potentially a wave election. But in Maryland, you have an incumbent governor who's very popular and has a lot of fundraising success, a lot of money in the bank. When Democratic voters are looking at candidates, they'll maybe see some little differences on the issues, but also have to think about who's going to be strongest in November. Why do you think that's you?
Well, in addition to the polls that have come out, they've shown that not only am I leading the Democratic field, but when matched against Governor Hogan one-on-one, I've come within 7 points to 10 points behind him, which is closer than the other 7 that are running. And I think the reason is because people look at, the more they get to know the record in Prince George's County, we lead the state in job creations. We are building a brand new regional medical center, so health care and health disparity is something we dealt with. And we're making progress in our education system and our crime. Our homicide rates are down 18% over last year. So I think people look at the record there and say, you know what, if he can do that job in Prince George's County, what can he do across the state? I think that's what we take across the rest of the state, talking about that.
How do Prince George's residents feel about the casino? I get these reports by email once a month. The state lottery agency sends out how much revenue the state is getting out of various facilities, and the MGM facility is printing money. But at the same time, and certainly it's employing a lot of people. At the same time, there are always concerns on the gambling issue about social costs. What do you see? How do county residents feel about it?
You know, it's interesting. I pushed for the MGM to come and to come to National Harbor. And so people were leery of that because I had a record of not voting for gaming when I was in the General Assembly. But I felt if we built a destination resort on entertainment, that would be a lot different. And so it's a high-end one. What we've seen is that residents are happy, one, because their property values have gone up. to the employment, as you mentioned, but also, the expectation of crime has been shown that crime is down in the county. It also gave us additional money to deal with the addiction problems that we had already. Because what we found out when we did a study was that a number of Prince Georgians were going to Anne Arundel County to live, for gaming. But yet the problems were coming back to Prince George's County, the addictions and things of that nature, without the resources to deal with it. At least now we have more resources to deal with issues in Prince George's County and more money to put into our schools. So it's been a win. People have been very happy. It brought in some other things that people had been crying for in Prince George's County, and that is shopping and restaurants. And what I'd like to say is we actually lead the state of Maryland in getting Virginians to come over and spend their money in Maryland.
Well, what's your perspective on this competition for the Amazon second headquarters? They released their very long short list. Prince George's County did not make the cut. Baltimore City did not. Montgomery did. I gather there was no little handwritten note from Jeff Bezos explaining that?
No, he didn't. We thought we had a very good proposal, given that we had the University of Maryland there and a number of things that I think could be effective. But we didn't get it. And immediately, I sent my colleague, Ike Leggett, a note saying, we want you to get it. We think it's good for the state of Maryland. We're 100% behind you. I think that's only fair. It was a fair competition. And when Prince George's County went after the FBI, Montgomery County did the same thing. They came in, they said, we support your proposal. So we're going to do that. If Baltimore City had been chosen, we certainly would have been in there supporting them.
A couple of weeks ago, we had Senate President Miller on the program, and I asked him a political question about appearing at a fundraiser for you, and he talked about you, and it was interesting because it was in personal terms, not political. He talked about you as a husband, as a father, and some people are aware, but many people are not, of the situation with your wife, who at a very young age experienced early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, I believe. You've had this enormous personal challenge.
Yeah, it started right so my wife was 48 when she was first diagnosed with early onset, which is extremely young. And when I was elected county executive, my wife was 50 and right away began to experience issues to the point where right now she doesn't have the ability to speak or walk. But we were very fortunate. This is what Senator Miller tells. As county executive, there are a lot of resources at my disposal. And so the help I need with my wife is there. My family is great. And what my family and I, my children and I, decided is that any chance we get to talk about what an amazing person my wife is, and she is, she's still my biggest advisor, but also how do we make sure that other families get the same support that we're getting and that other families don't go through this. And so we made it a part of our mission to raise money for Alzheimer's awareness. Prince George's County is the dementia-friendly county in the United States. And when we're building the new hospital, that is something that shaped how I wanted to see healthcare delivered to Prince George's County.
I'm struck by the two sides of your life: the county executive, politician, sport coat, grip and grin, big smile, and at home the caregiver supporting the very basic needs. It must have, but how has this changed you as a person?
Tremendously. It keeps your perspective of what's important. I'll give you an example. We just came through a very, trying time doing fundraising for the campaign, being out on the trail, getting people to know me. And I decided, I wanted to take my wife, who now can travel, to Massachusetts to visit her brother. And there was an event happening. And it didn't take me any thought at all to say, you know what? Taking her to Massachusetts for that event, it's the most important thing I can do right now. And it keeps you in perspective.
Just have a few seconds, but how has it changed your perspective on the healthcare system?
Yeah, healthcare went from not being on my radar screen to the number one important issue in Prince George's County, how it affects our our education system, how it affects crime, but more importantly, how do we make sure that everyone gets quality health care like I do? Especially one of the big fights we're having now is around prescription drugs. My wife is on medication for the rest of her life. I've seen it go up. And I have the resources to pay for it, but what happens to those families? So it's changed how I govern, and I think that's the way it should be. It should change the way that you implement policy. That's what she would want.
Sharon Baker's the county executive for Prince George's County. Sir, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Back to Annapolis, where Charles Robinson is standing by. And Charles, we just heard the county executive talk about fundraising. Fundraising reports were due this week for all the candidates. What did we learn?
Well, the big winner here is none other than Governor Hogan. He has roughly about $9 million on hand. That is both cash and pledges. Coming in second place, if you will, are two Democratic candidates. That's Kevin Kamenetz and Jim Shea. They have roughly about $2 million. Sharon Baker, who you just talked to, has just a little north of $1 million. And then there's Ben Jealous, the former NAACP head. He has about $1.5 million. Now, many of the other candidates are just south of $1 million. Many of them are actually loaning money to themselves to get them through the primary season, which comes up in June.
Charles Robinson at the State House for us. Charles, have a good weekend. Thank you for joining us for State Circle. Tune in every week at this time as we bring the State House to your house. We're back Monday with Direct Connection, live at 7. For all of us here at MPT, I'm Jeff Salkin. Thanks for watching and have a good night.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.
Artworks is MPT's weekly on-air arts salon.
My motivation is a very personal one.
Get the insider track on artists from across the country and the world.
Our artists are an eclectic group of creative minds.
Discover our area's diverse artists, musicians, and writers.
Our village was a repository of dreams.
Join Rhea Fiken and her local co-hosts every week on Artworks. Tonight at 7:30 on MPT.
Public Square on MPT. It's TV worth watching.
Why would you want to send this young man to the gallows for a murder he did not commit?
I like young men. I like to look.
Did he seduce Mrs. French?
You are charged with the murder of Mrs. Emily French. How do you plead?
Not guilty.
I felt sick because I knew he had done something.
None of it is true. She's lying. Ruby, you're lying!
Saturday night at 9:30 on MPT.
Are you turning 70 and a half this year? If so, you generally have to start spending down your retirement account. Even the minimum distribution can place you in a sticky situation. Luckily, you can now use your IRA to make tax-free gifts. Gifts up to